Tesla is unquestionably the car company that has come to define what a modern EV should be, even though Nissan actually beat Tesla to market by a full 2 years with the first high-volume production electric vehicle for North America. That was the original 2011 Nissan Leaf. That was released nearly 2 full years before the Tesla Model S entered production. Up till that point, Tesla had been a very low-volume producer, building basically electric versions of a Lotus. Now in steps the next generation of Nissan's electrification strategy. This is the all-new Nissan Ariya. And it is definitely a bit of a blend of Nissan's vision for electrification and honestly, a bit of Tesla's vision for electrification too. As you'd expect out of Nissan, the Ariya has a strong value proposition with tons of standard feature content, very comfortable seats, what they say is the quietest cabin in this segment. But very unlike the Nissan Leaf, this is less focused on efficiency than it is on performance and some of those other creature comforts. Sort of a little bit more like we see out of the Tesla lineup. So unlike the Nissan Leaf, we have a liquid-cooled battery that's going to make a lot of fans happy. We have much faster charging supporting the new CCS standard. And then of course we have a much more attractive and distinctive design than we found in the Nissan Leaf. You can also get a dual motor version that will go 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds. Now taking a look at the front end design first, we have very slim LED headlights and they're really well integrated with this sort of grille thing going on up front. Obviously EVs don't need a lot of cooling. That's just happening right down there. So this is all just styling going on the front end. And it is much more blunt, much more upright than we find in the Nissan Leaf. These are functional air vents on either side, and then hidden somewhere up front, we have radar sensors and ultrasonic sensors that combine to enable this to have Nissan's first hands-free driving assistant, very much like Cadillac Super Cruise. With an overall length of just under 183 inches, the Ariya is competing in the hottest segment in America against other compact crossovers, obviously electric and otherwise. Interior dimensions are in some ways a little bit closer to the Murano because of the electric drivetrain, but in other ways actually a little smaller than the rest of the gasoline compact segment, most notably that cargo area in the back, as you can see with that really sloping profile in the rear. Nissan decided not to give this model a front trunk. Instead, they decided to shorten the front overhang, make this a very short front profile and maximize the space in the rear, pretty much like we see in the Ioniq 5 and the EV6. Also direct competition to this would be the Mach-E and the upcoming Equinox EV. Both of those vehicles will likely have the $7,500 federal tax credit come January. This, however, will not, because this is built in Japan and it has to be assembled in North America to qualify for the new tax credit scheme. In this video, I'm driving the front-wheel drive Premier trim. We have 235 width tires all the way around, and I'd love to know what you think about the wheel design on this vehicle. If you get the copper paint color, then we have these copper accents inside the wheel grid there. These are sort of arrow covers. If you don't get the copper on the Premier trim, then you actually get a gray insert there instead. So it's gray and black rather than the copper and black. I have to say, I really love this color matching thing, and part of me wishes that it was color matched in every trim. Let me know what you think about that as well. The clean and modern aesthetic continues out back where we find full LED taillight modules, and then in this section we have Nissan spelled out inside the module that has the LED light pipe that connects one side to the other. That's certainly going to be a lot easier to clean than if they'd put those letters on the surface of the rear bumper. It's also probably a hair more aerodynamic. Up top, less aerodynamic, we have a rear windshield wiper, which is certainly going to make rear wiper fans happy. We then have an aerodynamic spoiler and 2 big shark fin antennas on top, because everybody knows that the answer is always more shark fin. At the start of North American sales in October of 2022, the Ariya is going to be available only as a front-wheel drive vehicle with 2 different battery packs and 2 different power levels. The base battery pack is a 66 kilowatt-hour unit that's usable capacity, and it's located under the seating area of the vehicle. There's also an optional 91 kilowatt-hour battery that's the extended range pack. The base power figure is going to be 214 horsepower, 221 pound-feet of torque, and if you get the bigger battery pack, power bumps up to 238 horsepower. If you get the dual motor version, which is going to come a few months later, that will bump power all the way up to a maximum of 389 horsepower and 442 pound-feet of torque. We don't have all of the details just yet for the all-wheel drive versions of the Ariya, but it is interesting that even if you choose the small battery pack, all-wheel drive will be available, and that model will be nearly as quick as the model with the big battery pack and the dual motor setup. Range is going to vary between 304 miles for the longest range single motor model and about 216 miles on the low end of things. Charging happens behind this door on the passenger side front fender. There is an onboard 7.2 kilowatt charger, but you should know that that is slower than most of the competition's level 2 chargers, and definitely slower than the 19 kilowatt charger that we're going to see upcoming in the new Chevy Equinox. However, unless you're going to put in a high amperage EVSE at home, you're probably not going to be charging much faster than 6 to 7 kilowatts anyway. So this is kind of a rational choice to help keep costs low. DC fast charging, that is a big change for Nissan. This no longer supports CHAdeMO, that big plug that we found on the front of the Nissan Leaf. Instead, this supports the newer CCS DC fast charge standard and a peak rate of 130 kilowatts. That's going to get this from 10% to 80% in about 40 minutes. 130 kilowatts may not be as exciting as the really fast charge rate we find in Hyundai and Kia EVs, but it's pretty comparable to what we see in the Subaru, the Toyota, the Ford Mustang Mach-E, and of course the upcoming Equinox EV. They're all going to be relatively similar when it comes to the DC fast charge times. As I've come to expect from Nissan, I found the driver's seat to be very comfortable. This is a multi-way power driver's seat with 4-way adjustable lumbar support and 2-position memory over there on the door. Now, the base version of the Ariya is going to have a power driver's seat, but oddly enough, not every Ariya on the dealer lot will have that power seat. This one also has a power passenger seat, but it's lacking the 4-way lumbar, but other than that, it's basically the same design. We also have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty large range of motion. Jumping into the back seat, there is a ton of room back here. According to the numbers, this has a little bit less legroom than we find in the Mach-E or the Ioniq 5, but in reality, I think it's about the same, and it simply has to do with the way that this is apportioned. The seating is a bit more upright, which means that you can move that front seat a little bit further forward, a little bit closer to the dashboard, and that gives us a lot more room back here in the rear. Things are pretty comfortable because we have a completely flat floor, and here in the center, my hair is just barely brushing the ceiling, but my head's not touching the ceiling, even if I raise that headrest and put my head all the way back there to the rear. Scooting all the way over, this front seat's all the way back in its tracks. You see, I can still have about 4 inches of legroom left. Now, these rear seats, they don't have the same kind of recline that we find in other Nissan vehicles. There's just a one-stage recline, and it only moves maybe about 3/4 of an inch or so. We do, however, have a padded center armrest with 2 large cup holders, and of course, you can fold these seats completely flat. Also a nice touch, the shoulder belt for the center seat position comes out of the seat rather than out of the ceiling. That makes it easier to deal with child seats and also makes that cargo area a bit more square. Rear passengers get standard air vents, and interesting twist, the base model has standard heated seats, but when you start stepping up, the heated seats disappear and then reappear later in the trim walk. Behind the power hatch, we find 22.8 cubic feet of cargo capacity, which does put this a little below average for the compact crossover segment. This 22-inch roller bag cannot be in that position and then still have the hatch close if this tonneau cover is in place. It is one of the rigid variety, so you do have to pull it out and then stash it somewhere if you want to maximize your cargo carrying capacity. Then you could line up several of those bags back here and still close the hatch. As we see in other Nissan vehicles, there is a place to stick this. If I pull that out of the way really quickly, you can see that we have the divide and hide storage system. This is a variation of that theme that we find in the Rogue. I can pull up the lower floor. It's in 2 positions, pop it in that position, and then I could, for instance, store this rigid cargo cover right there under the floor. But obviously, that means now that I can't use all that space right there. That's also where you could put the charge cord because, of course, again, no front trunk. Even further down the rabbit hole, we have this enormous foam divider that is suspiciously shaped like a spare tire, because if I pull that completely out of the way, we actually find what looks like a place where you could put a compact donut if you wanted to get one aftermarket. Nissan has not been able to comment just yet, but I suspect other world markets for the Ariya will offer a compact spare tire, and because we have this mounting point here, you could probably get that spare tire and put it in your North American Ariya if you wanted to. Otherwise, we just have this foam divider with a bit of additional storage space. Honestly, this foam divider takes up a lot of room. Then we have the inflator, can affix a flat, etc. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that this is at the moment the top-end version. We have a square rearview mirror, kind of an interesting design for Nissan there. Sunglass holder up here, the controls for this large panoramic moonroof. The shade does open and close, as does this front section of the glass. So if you're looking for an EV with an actual moonroof, this is one of them. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, 2-way adjustable headrests. This interior uses a combination of different materials. We have imitation leather for the seat's main portions. Then on the back, we have fabric to help improve durability back there. And then we have an imitation suede insert on the seat back and seat bottom cushion. These are perforated, but the seats are not ventilated. On the front doors, we have lots of soft touch materials on the upper section of the door, harder plastics on the bottom to help improve durability. We have a bottle holder right down there. And then we have a really cool touch, which was inspired by Japanese lanterns. You can see this little section that kind of looks like a speaker grill with maybe white paint behind. That's actually not white paint. That's actually an illuminated section. You can turn that on and off, but that really gives the interior a cool look at night. I was able to experience that a little bit in a parking garage, and then it's mimicked down here with this little section between the driver and front passenger footwells, so it's a little bit easier to see what's going on down there in that area. The rear doors have a very similar styled pattern to them, but they're not illuminated on the rear doors, it's just the front. There's also an ambient light strip that runs right there across the door and then all the way across the dashboard. You can see it's actually a continuous loop all the way across the dash. That not only is an ambient light strip, it also gives us the status of the hands off the wheel steering system that we'll talk about a little bit later. We have soft touch materials on the dashboard. We have a large slot-style glove compartment. I was able to fit a large tablet computer inside. And then we have standard these large 12.3-inch LCDs. They're kind of an interesting shape. This one's a little bit convex. That one's a little bit concave right there on the driver's section. This one's a touchscreen. The instrument cluster obviously isn't. And then between the two, we have two touch buttons, one for easy access to the 360-degree camera system, and then one to change day-night mode for the system. This software is a little bit different than we've seen from Nissan in the past because smartphone integration uses the entire screen, and then the displays are a little bit different than we've seen in other Nissan models. This is not quite as snappy as the software that we find, for instance, in, say, a Kia or a Hyundai vehicle, but it's definitely a lot snappier and less buggy than the sync system that we find in the Mach-E, although the screen isn't quite as large. Down here we have two large air vents, and then we have this really cool strip of imitation wood that runs right across the dashboard. I think this interior looks better in the lighter colors that are available. This one is charcoal, so it's a little bit hard to tell the details. Nissan did an excellent job integrating the controls into this imitation wood strip. They're really well lit, and the haptic feedback is nice. When you touch the option, the dashboard subtly vibrates to indicate which option you have selected. Now, moving down from the dashboard there, we have the center console, and this little open and close control here is kind of interesting. That actually controls that little portal right there, and you can see it not only comes out, it actually swoops up a little bit from the dashboard. Nissan says that you can stop it in any position to use as, say, a tablet holder or something like that. If you're DC fast charging, you can stick a lot of stuff in there, and then there's a little lid so that way you can put things on there as well. But not everything will fit. Tablet computers, for instance, or smartphones, they just won't fit there with that door in the closed position. Over here we have a joystick style shifter. We push that unlock button, pull back for drive, press the P button for park. Over here we have controls for the power sliding center console. If I power slide that and then close that little storage tray and look over the abyss, you can see we have USB inputs for the infotainment system, a place where you can stick your smartphone, 12-volt power port right there, and this is a place for you to wind up your cords. But interestingly, we don't have a whole lot of storage because of this large power mechanism. So if I open this armrest, it's a fairly small storage area right there, and then we have two cup holders right here under that roller top section. On the driver's side, we find a standard full LCD instrument cluster with a style that's very similar to the Nissan Rogue and a new two-spoke steering wheel. We have controls for the infotainment system over here, along with controls for that multifunction LCD cluster, and then the controls for the adaptive cruise control and the hands off the wheel steering assist system over here on the right side. That's why we have this driver attention monitoring little module right here. That's so that it can actually make sure that you're paying attention to the road. Those little LEDs are not visible to the human eye. And if you are paying attention to the road, this is going to have a Super Cruise-like system where your hands off the wheel, eyes on the road as it does all the steering, braking, and acceleration for you. I like the fact that Nissan continues to give us a charge time estimate here in the instrument cluster. You can see that if I were to connect to a level 1 charge cord, it would take 10 hours to get completely full. And then I can adjust this so I can see what it'd be like if I had access to a 7.2 kilowatt EVSE. You can see it would only take 100 minutes there. And then, of course, I could adjust that all the way up to the DC fast charge speed of 130 kW, so I can see what that would take. It'd be 35 minutes because, of course, the charge rate up from 86% to 100% is not overly swift. Clearly, the first thing we need to do is talk about acceleration, so let's just go ahead and floor it here, see what happens. Right at around 40 miles an hour, we get max power output from the battery and the electric motor. That's rational because we just have that single electric motor up front in this model, and they didn't want to overwhelm the front tires. This yields a 0 to 60 time in 7.3 seconds in my unofficial testing out here in Nashville. Now keep in mind that this might change a little bit based on this vehicle at home on my usual test surface, but it's probably going to be pretty close because electric vehicles are not affected by altitude or ambient temperature as much. If you get the dual motor model, then 0 to 60 times are going to be right around 5 seconds, just below if you get the fastest version of this, just over if you get the standard range battery and all-wheel drive, which is going to be an option. Now, a lot of folks are wondering, why did they choose to put a single electric motor just up front, rather than make this rear-wheel drive like we find in the Ioniq 5 or an ID4? Well, the answer is pretty logical, and it's the same answer that Polestar gave when they said they put the single electric motor in the front of the Polestar 2. It all has to do with regen braking dynamics and general driving dynamics. When you're regen braking in a vehicle, the front electric motor is the one that you want doing the majority of the regen. Just like in a regular vehicle, that's the side of the vehicle that's doing most of the braking for you, period. You want that front electric motor to do the regen. If this only had a motor in the rear, it could create some adverse vehicle dynamics in snow, ice, etc., and it's not going to be able to regen as much as if the motor was up front. And the regen can be pretty aggressive. It's adjustable by enabling that E-step mode there, or you can put it in B, or you can put it in B with E-step. That's basically all the variation you get when it comes to the regen braking here. So no paddle shifters on the back of the wheel like we find in the Hyundai or Kia vehicles. I wish that Nissan would give us a little bit more adjustability. Also, if you're a fan of one pedal driving, you should know this is not going to take you to a complete stop. So if I engage the E-step mode here, it's going to take me all the way down here to, let's see, so now it's going 20 miles an hour or so, and then it's just going to continue creeping forward. So it's just going to hit a point where the regen is turned off. It's almost there, almost there, almost there, almost there, about 7 miles an hour. And at this point, I would then have to put my foot on the brake pedal, then it would hold me here, then I can take off again. So not one pedal driving in the same way that we find in some of the competition. Personally, I don't mind because I'm not the biggest fan of one pedal driving. I would rather put this in its regular D mode most of the time with E-step off, and then just control the regen braking with my right foot, because this does have a blended braking system, meaning that when you put your foot on the brake pedal, it's going to regen more power into the battery. And that's not what we find, of course, in Teslas or Rivians or a limited number of EVs out there. I don't have any braking distance measurements just yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if this was in the 120-foot range. This is a little bit heavier than some EVs currently on the market, but not quite as heavy as something like the Cadillac Lyriq. Handling seems to be pretty decent. We have 235 width tires on all models, but the biggest thing that impressed me with the Ariya is the cabin quietness. Nissan says that this is now going to be the quietest cabin in this segment. I haven't been able to verify that, but I can say that this cabin is very, very quiet. At 50 miles an hour, there's really not a lot of noise going on in here, and at higher speeds, I actually heard a little bit more wind noise than road noise, and that's not something that we find in most of the competition. If you're looking for a quiet, serene experience, you definitely want to get the Ariya. The suspension is also tuned towards the softer side of things. That's likely enabled by the more upright profile we find in the Ariya. They weren't trying to give this a really low-slung front end, something like that would have limited suspension travel. So this seems to have suspension travel more similar to the average gasoline compact crossover. So a lot more compliant, a lot more easy to live with. This is the kind of vehicle that is great to daily commute with. It's comfortable, it's quiet, the seats are comfortable as well, the handling is decent. It's not going to break any handling records like you might get in a lightweight eGMP platform vehicle with 255 width tires, but this is not trying to be a EV6 GT, and it's not trying to be a Mustang Mach-E GT. Instead, it's trying to be a middle-of-the-road, excellent crossover that has a good balance between ride, handling, cabin quietness, etc. And I think Nissan nailed that exactly on the head. It's a bit difficult to talk about efficiency because I haven't been driving this on my usual test loop, but so far I've been averaging 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour, and that has included highway driving, rural driving like this, and a lot of idling and photo shooting as well. Fuel economy appears to be pretty similar to the EV6 and definitely a little bit above the Mach-E. The Mach-E does have a bigger battery pack, but it's not necessarily going to get you further because it is a bit less efficient. Unfortunately, Nissan did not have any dual motor versions for us to drive out here in Tennessee, so be sure and stay tuned for that video. Hopefully that'll be coming in early 2023. But at the moment, it's easy to say that the Ariya is an EV that is certainly focused on comfort. And in many ways, this reminds me a bit more of the EVs that we're gonna see from Lexus and we already see from Cadillac. As far as the isolation, the way this feels out on the road, this reminds me of the Cadillac Lyriq and again of an electrified Lexus RX. Certainly more than a Mustang Mach-E, which is really trying to be a Tesla with a Ford logo on the front. With the Mustang Mach-E, they may not have been able to duplicate the Tesla's handling ability, but they have certainly replicated Tesla ride quality, which is much, much stiffer than the Ariya. This rides like a Nissan Murano, maybe a slightly smaller, slightly easier to steer Nissan Murano, but still very similar to that. The Model Y, it's very, very firmly sprung, as is the Mach-E. Now the Mach-E GT is a little bit better with the adaptive suspension, but we're talking about a completely different customer, different price range than this. Even the Ioniq 5 or the EV6 that are tuned towards the softer side of things in the EV segment, they come across as a little bit firmer than this, and there are obviously some different compromises here and there. The EV6's biggest compromise is going to be the back seat width, which is not terribly wide. It's going to be a little bit more cramped for adults in the back. The Ariya, I think, represents a more balanced approach with a still usable back seat, whether you want to put adults or children back there, a quiet and comfortable cabin, and relatively decent range. Thanks to the pandemic and the global chip shortage, the Ariya is at least a year late arriving in the US, but it will be on sale October 2022. At that point, you're going to find the front-wheel drive models and some limited configurations. By early 2023, everything is going to be available, including the dual motor models. Pricing is going to start at $43,190. Depending on how you want to look at it, that's either high or it's a good value. We'll talk about that in just a second. If you want the dual motor model with the base battery pack, that's $47,190. And for that same price, you could get front-wheel drive with the extended range pack, which is basically what this model is here. The minimum point of entry for all-wheel drive on the extended range is $51,190, and this is at the moment the top-end version of the front-wheel drive lineup at around $55,000 as equipped here. The Platinum all-wheel drive, that's going to be the pinnacle of the Ariya lineup at $60,190. Now, how is it that this is $43,190 starting, where a lot of the competition comes in right at or under $40,000? Well, it all has to do with the standard feature content. Nissan made some interesting decisions with the Ariya. The base model is incredibly well equipped. It has heated seats front and rear, heated steering wheel, 19-inch wheels, LED headlights, the leatherette seats on the inside, power driver's seat with the memory. We also get the two 12.3-inch LCDs on the inside, navigation software, the color heads-up display, the power console, 2-zone automatic climate control, and adaptive cruise control. But what's weird is, as you start stepping up the trim ladder and start getting different options, some of those features actually drop off the list and then become standard in higher end trims. So the base model is incredibly well equipped. But then if you want the extended range battery pack, you have to give up some of those features in order to get that extended range. So Nissan is giving you the choice, range or feature set for relatively similar pricing, or if you want the range and the features, then you have to pay extra for that. The top-end Platinum all-wheel drive model is probably the one that's going to have the worst value proposition. It does have a ton of features that we do not find on all the competition. Most notably, the hands-free driving system is going to be on that Platinum trim, but its price tag is very, very close, or actually a little bit above some of the competition from Korea. That will give you very similar kinds of feature sets, not quite as much room on the inside, especially in the back seat. The Kia is significantly tighter in the back seat area than this Nissan Ariya, and it's not going to have that hands-free setup, but it is going to give you excellent performance. It actually is going to be a little bit quicker than this 0 to 60, and it's going to charge much, much faster. So be sure and let me know what you think about that in the comment section. Nobody is quite sure what the future of Ariya production will be like. Nissan has said that they are going to be moving some EV production to the US for 2 new EV models. But whether or not the Ariya is going to move production to the US in order to regain the $7,500 tax credit, we don't know just yet. In many ways, a direct competitor to this is going to be the Chevy Equinox, and the Equinox is going to have the federal tax credit from the very beginning because it's going to be built in North America. Also, the Mustang Mach-E is likely going to have its tax credit January of 2023 because it's built in Mexico, which is also North America, and this one is built in Japan at the moment. So let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. Do you think that Nissan has targeted the pricing and the feature content right for this? Lots of features standard, but you give up a little bit of range versus some of the competition. Of course, we don't have the tax credit either, but on the inside we have a big, comfy ride with excellent ride quality and comfortable seats. Again, not something you find in all the competition. I find the seats and the ride quality significantly more comfortable than the Mustang Mach-E, also than the Model Y. Obviously, handling is not where the Model Y is, but this is really targeted at someone that wants that comfier ride. I liken this to really the electric Murano. Let me know what you think about that as well. What are you going to buy if you're shopping for an EV in this segment? Are you going to wait for that relatively inexpensive Equinox with that big tax credit on it? That does look pretty enticing. Let me know. Find me over at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of their social places, and I'll see all of you next week.